right. Okay, so I can see we have a few numbers here already. Hello, Suzanne. Hello, Lila. Yeah, please go ahead and drop a message in the chat if you can hear me clearly, so we can jump into the topic for today. All right. So if you can hear me, just drop a message in the chat. I can see Odibas, good evening. Obasi Ikechukwu, good evening. All right. Um, let's go ahead and kick off already. It's 8:03, right? And we're going to be discussing ES6 modules and module system in JavaScript. Okay. I think I can see more messages coming in now. Edwin, Austin. All right. Okay. So I can see. Yeah, I believe we're good to go. By the way, when we kick off today's class, I'm actually expecting to get more questions in the chat. Right. So do well to ask a question so we can, you know, cover those questions as fast as possible, right? And the point of taking JavaScript one step at a time in these our sessions is to ensure that you guys understand some of the patterns, some of the some of the I would say, yeah, some of the patterns when it comes to writing JavaScript code. Okay, maybe you're coming from a different background, maybe you are new to programming in general. It makes sense that you understand some of these details, so that by the time we start using this for building front-end applications, maybe with Vue or React, or when we start using this to build back-end applications with Node and Express or some other Node.js frameworks, it would be easier for you to pick up on some patterns when you notice some of those things in the specific framework code that you find yourself using. Okay, so what we're covering today is going to be pretty I would say straightforward, right? Of course, don't pay so much attention to the patterns in the code just yet, right? Let me explain first, then you can ask questions based on your observation. But as regards the concept, when we say module, I mentioned yesterday, when we say module, we're simply referring to a JavaScript file. Let's just use that as a baseline, okay? So if I say, let's work on a project, I'm sure you can see my screen clearly. Let me try to zoom out even more. Okay. So if I say, let us create a module, right? For example, so this should be Note 5. I think, yeah, this should be Note 4. I think I did some renaming here, but I still have to do more, adjustment. I have to structure this properly for you, right? So if I create a new file, main.js, and yeah, so this is a new file, main.js. Let's have this, side by side. Right. Let's have this side by side. Come on, this side. Okay. All right. So if I just created a new file here. This is, this can be referred to as a module. So if I have like a function for performing some calculation, I can say check tax, right? Or compute employee tax. Okay. So let's assume I accept a salary, for example. Yeah, I just accept the salary and I just return, maybe I say I return the salary multiplied by 10 divided by 100, right? So this is a function that we have within this main.js file, which I am referring at this point, as a module, right? I'm going to create a separate file for this, right? Because I want us to, look at to understand the concept even better. So if I create a file here, I call this, employee checks, for example, .js. So I just call that employee checks. There's nothing special about the naming, by the way. The idea is every single computation I want to have for my employee records, I can choose to put them here, right? This is a compute. I wrote computer. Wow, crazy. So this is compute employee tax, and maybe I have compute. Let's see. What am I computing? Oh yeah, let's just say compute per day check or something, right? And I pass in maybe an employee. If I have an employee class, but for now, let's just assume I'm not expecting anything. I'll just return employees birthday. Okay, so I have these two functions in here, and then I want to reuse them within this file. Now it makes sense that we are not going to include every single function that make up our entire code into this single file. So I can have them here, and I can go ahead to import and use them here, right? So at the end of the day, we have a module specific for specifically doing things like employee checks, trying to get information or trying to perform some kind of computation about the employee data, right? That will be passed in. Okay, so I'm going to show us how to do that. Let's take this step by step so you understand how we work with modules in the past and how we work with modules today. Okay, so in JavaScript, a module is a self-contained piece of code that encapsulates a set of related functions, variables, classes, or components, right? So this is what I even want you to pay attention to, okay? It's a self-contained piece of code that encapsulates a set of related functions. So yeah, I mean, does that mean you cannot put functions that are not related? Of course you can, but it makes sense that there should be something that like a logical reasoning around the kind of code you put within a module or within a JavaScript file. If I have a module that I call maybe hot helper, right? So just take a look at this. So let's call this hot helper like this .js. Now what I'm trying to say here might be, and this is for the sake of this example, okay? So it might be that I'm trying to group all the things that would work together to be able to, do things like allow users to sign in, allow users to, authenticate, right, and stuff like that. So I can have something like, maybe hash user password, right? That can be a function because when I try to create an account in an ideal scenario, I'm going to put in my email, my password, and then there are some checks that should be done. There are some actions that should be carried out on the back end. And this is just an example, okay? Another example to make you understand what I mean by piece of code that encapsulates a set of related functions, right? So right here, I have a function that would hash the user password. Remember, documentation is great. So I'm assuming that I'm expecting the original password. So let me just call that original password, right? And at the end of the day, I'm going to return the hashed password. Okay, so let's say return hashed password. Now, the thing is, I did not really create the variable just yet. So let's do that now. Hash password equals, so this would contain the function for hashing the password. So there are ways to hash passwords. We'll basically look at that when we start doing backend programming, right, with JavaScript. I'm just going to put a random value here. So I can now put a comment, right, that would say, yeah, that would say something like, this is the function for hashing user password. Okay, so keep it simple. Let's go ahead, duplicate this. This time around, I'm going to simply call this check email validity or something. Check email validity, right? And I'm then going to say we're expecting to pass in the email, or we can call that original email, right? Whatever you choose to call that, okay? So I'm going to create I'm going to create a variable here. I would say let email, or I would say is email valid, right? And maybe I call something, yeah, I'm just going to call something. Let me just put true for now, right? Because I don't have any, any plans to implement this. So let me just put true. I would say call a function to validate email, right? And I'm just going to return this. Okay, so this would give me true or false. Now, if you take a look at this right now, what I've done here is I'll say return true or false, okay, when checking email validity. Okay, so what I've done here is I've created two functions, and what these two functions will do for me in my project is to check if an email is valid, or to also hash a password, right? Of course, these things are related, and I put them under what I call auth helper, right? This is just an assumption. Now, this can be, this is what you call a module. This file itself is a module because it's basically containing, piece of code that are related. And of course, you can reuse them in, different parts of your projects, right? So let's come back in here. This is the point where you are going to have to import these, these items. Now I will show you how to import these items into a different file, but I'm not going to jump straight into that. Let's start off by looking at how how these modules were actually created in the past before ES6, right? So before ES6, these are some of the patterns you would use. We call this the module pattern, right? We have the module pattern. We also have the revealing module pattern. Now, if you take a look at this, it's quite you're simply working with a function. But what you are doing with this function is this function wrap this module right here wraps what we call an anonymous function that will initialize automatically, as you can see. So this is going to be initialized and passed into this module variable. Now, what happens here is that private, you don't want anybody to access this, and we say this is to share that again. Apologies, I think that was my network. If you can, okay, yeah, please let me know in the chat if you can still see my screen. Let me know in the chat if you can still see my screen, so I can continue. Okay, anybody, just drop a message. Hmm. Okay, so I don't think I'm getting any message. Okay, okay, Lila. Okay, thank you. All right. So what you're seeing here right now is when you execute this particular function that have been passed into this module variable that we created, you don't have access to the private var, right? Whatever you call this, it can be name or hello, whatever it is. You don't have access to this. You only have access to the items that were found within the return the return statement here, right? So you see when we have return, we then pass in a function object. This is a function object, right? I'm sure you know what this is. We've covered this before. So this is basically an object, but now it's we pass in a function, right? So you see we have that return object, we have the public method function, and then we perform that action. That action you're performing here basically have access to that variable. But when you try to execute, if you want to maybe get direct access to that variable, it will tell you this is not found. You can't do this. So if I say console.log and I try to access this particular variable, let's run this. So let's go into, let's see, cd what's that, node 5. Okay, so I'm just navigating into that directory. Okay, so if I say node main.js, you see I have undefined. I have undefined because I can't access this at this point. Okay, I can only access the items within the return statement. So if I go ahead and I grab that function, if I run that function, you see it gets us private, right? Now the undefined you're seeing is because I'm trying to log. Meanwhile, I also performed console.log here. So what I should do instead is return, right? Because I'm already using console.log outside. So if I run this again, then you are going to see I am private without the undefined. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. This is how you would perform that sort of encapsulation, right? um, let's go ahead and create maybe like a new variable here. Let's just say const name, or maybe const pi, for example, equals 3.142. Okay, and right here I can also create like a new method, but let's just use this. So I have I'm going to call this maths method, just to show you that the naming is not what we're looking at, but we're looking at the action and the functionality. Okay, so I can go ahead and return pi right here. So if I call math method, we're simply returning, which of course you can have a computation in there, but at least you can see that we have 3.142 right here. Okay, so you have access to this. If you pull the GitHub repo, you would see that sample code. This is the second pattern, basically the same thing, but the idea here is you reveal a public method, and then you have your private function. you basically reveal the public function, right? And then you have the private function doing its thing, right? So you are able to actually create like multiple functions, within the yeah, you can have multiple functions here. We can call this maybe function one, function two, just like that. So depending on all the operations you want to carry out, you have your variables in here, right? And of course, your variables can also be passed in if you want it to be passed in. But then, you can simply, let's just call this function two, function one, the items we are returning. And this can be anything. This can be a var, full name, it can be anything. Let's just say John Doe. Okay. So if I proceed to call one of these, so let's say function one, for example, function one. Okay. So that would basically are we returning anything? I don't think we're returning anything, are we? Let's see. What do we have? It says function one is not a function. Oh yeah, because I made a mistake, I believe. Function. Okay. So let's see, what was the issue? Revealing function one. Did I make a mistake there? Okay, it says it is not a function. I'm trying to figure out why it says that is not a function, because it is actually a function. All right, let's see where that is coming. Oh yeah. I was trying to make the same mistake. Okay, so I made the same mistake again. Apologies. Right, so it was actually correct. The spelling was correct. This is what I was about to rename, not the other one. Right, so this is what I was about to rename. The item you have within the return statement here. Okay, because this is what you have access to. So let's just call the public method, and then within the public method, this is the pointer we have to call function one. Okay. So we can proceed to just run this because we're using a console.log. So now you see we have function one, right? And if we change this to function two, now we have function two. Now, this is not something you would find yourself using because we have new styles, we have new patterns, right? I explained this in the class yesterday as well, where I mentioned, common JS and ES6, import and export patterns. We're going to use that right now. Okay, so but for some reasons, if you find yourself looking at a code base that probably an old code base that implemented this pattern, at least you should understand how this is working, and you should also know how to use it. Okay, I don't think you will find sophisticated code bases that have done, maybe old code base that maybe they need like a revamp or something, right? Yeah, maybe they need some sort of revamp. But let's try to do something new right now. Okay, so looking at the previous code we wrote here, the hot helper, I want to be able to use this in a different file, right? In a different file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to export, and the right way to export, now this is common JS. We call it we say module.export, right? And then we pass in we pass in what we need to export, right? The functions, okay? So it can be a class, by the way, but for now we have functions. So I can pass in those two functions just like this, check email validity. So I've been able to pass in these two, right? Okay, and now that I've passed in these two, I can go ahead and import these, functions in a different file. So if I go to the main .js file, all I have to do is probably, accept those items within this object. So I can say I'm expecting, by the way, what's that again? Hash user password and check email validity. Okay, so I can say hash, is that correct? Hash user password and check email validity. Okay, so I'm going to import this. So I should do equals require. Almost forgot this is common JS, so I can say auth helper. So what you're seeing here is that we are performing that import, right? Taking the functions that were found in the other file, and we're bringing them in here. So I can go ahead and execute. So if I do this and probably pass in variable, that's the param. Sorry, I pass in the password, like the original password. So this is basically the original password, and of course you can also verify that. So you see we have original password. Okay, Remember, I also mentioned that when you're performing documentation, it makes sense that you also put in what you're expecting, just like this, because when you do it that way, um, it's a nice strategy to be able to at least understand what you're expecting in here, right? String. Okay, so if I pass in the password, I save, and then I run the main.js file, it's actually returning something, but we can't see what it returned because we did not log in here. We just use return directly, so we have to console.log. So by logging, you'll be able to at least see what it is returning: 1226162, which was exactly what we added in here, right? We just statically, or we can even make this better by just passing the original password first. So let's say plus, yeah, I'm just going to pass in the original password in here as well. So remember we mentioned this, right? String literal. Okay. So if I go ahead and run this again, now you see we have that number alongside the item that we passed in. That's the string that we passed in. Okay. So let's assume John Doe 1990. I don't know, should I say 1999? Yeah. So let's assume this is the password, the original password. When we hash this password, given our example, we just return a bunch of numbers alongside the password. Okay. For this example, but you get the point. We're basically using this from a different file because we're able to import it right here. And for check email validity as well, we can also go ahead and use that. You see, we're expecting the original email, which can be me at johndoe.com. Okay, and the idea is we have to console.log as well, so we see what is returned. So if I should run this, we just have true because we statically added true, right? We are not specifically checking if it's valid or not, but you get the point, right? We're able to use these functions that were found in the different files within the main.js file. Okay, so that is the common JS syntax. That's exactly what we've done. All right, your dependency is basically referring to the dependent file, or if you have maybe you installed a particular package or a particular module uh, from a different repository. We'll talk about that when we cover Node.js, by the way, because you can actually install modules or packages from different repositories. So if you install those kind of package, that package name would basically be the dependency. For now, our dependency is the file that we actually created these items in. Okay, so that's our dependency, which is the hot helper, right? You can of course add .js, that is still valid. Okay, all right, so let's take that off, and I hope this is clear. If you have any questions regarding what I did here, if you don't understand the concept of modules, ask your question now before we move to the latest pattern, which is leveraging the ES6 imports. Okay, where you have to export with a different style, just like this. Okay, and you also get to import with a different pattern. So if you have any questions on this CommonJS, you are going to see a lot of projects running this way, right? Because this was actually used for a very long time, so you'll see a lot of projects running this way. If you have any questions regarding this, do well to drop your questions in the chat so that we can respond to those questions before we move on. Right? I'll give you 2 minutes to do that. Okay, 2 minutes to do that. So go ahead and drop your questions if this is confusing. All right. I'm waiting for the question. So I can't see any question yet. So I'm assuming we are clear. Okay, so if you understood my explanation and this is very clear to you, drop a message in the chat. So let me know if this is clear to you. Let's go both ways. All right. So I want to see at least 20 messages. Okay, someone says, sir, why did you use an object literal to hold the functions? Let me understand. When you say, why did I use an object literal to hold the functions? Are you referring to, this is the only object? What do you mean by object literal? Maybe this is like a string literal, right? Are you referring to what we did? Where did we do that? Are you referring to this? The fact that we have, both function names within like the objects. Is that okay? So I think this is what you're referring to, right? What we've done simply is we just destructured the items we have in here, and we're able to pass them out here, right? You can choose to do this one at a time if that is what you want to do. Yes, you can choose to do this one at a time, right? So you can simply call this, auth helper, and then you proceed to say, auth helper dot this, right? Or auth helper dot that, okay? So yes, aha, okay, okay. I think that's what you meant. Okay. So if this is what you mean, if that's what you're talking about, which you have confirmed in the chat as well, yes, you can go about doing it this way. But when you use that, pattern, you're basically trying to grab all the functions within, because it's an object. You exported an object, remember? Okay. So what you did here was that you exported an object. If you want to export a single item, you can of course export a single item this way. Okay. If you just want to export one item from this file. If you have multiple items to export, then you wrap it within an object and you export like this. Okay. So when you export it like this, you also have to import. When you're importing and you choose to use a single name, and by the way, it can be any name, it can be Mav, if that's what you want to call it, right? So you can have like mav.this, right? Or mav.this, okay? So, but if you don't want to do that, then you can just put in an object and, bring in the functions in here. You basically destructure that object and you'll be able to use the function name individually directly within this file, okay? So whichever option works actually. Hope that's clear, Ikechukwu. Okay, so yeah, let's move on. All right, so what I'm going to do now is to, I'm just going to copy this. There's no need to create something again. I'm just going to copy this. All right, so these are basically simple arrow functions, and there, you know what this should do. This would basically add, this would subtract. Now we are using the ES6 pattern, and by leveraging this pattern, we can just export, those functions directly, right? So you can just export directly. And yeah, so when you export directly, if you are importing, this is what you then have to do, right? Unlike using the require pattern here, that will not work. So this is what you do, right? So you can say import, add, subtract from this, okay? So this is what you do. You can also export a class this way. By the way, I did not show you how to export a class when using CommonJS, but it's quite okay. I think we'll go back to that, right? We'll go back to that. So this is how you export the functions, right? And this is how you import it, okay? So we'll talk about classes, exporting and importing, classes once we test this, okay? Now the thing is, when you're about to execute this, this is going to give you an error telling you, oh, you can't do this, except you're in a model, blah blah blah. But I will show you how to fix that. I mean, the modern pattern or the modern style to fix that. In the past, we used things like call them transpilers, things like Babel or Webpack, right? Stuff like that. We basically have to do some transpilation, but we don't need to do that again, right now, because yeah, I mean, if you encounter projects like old projects that are currently using that pattern, at least you should understand what is happening. Webpack or Babel, these tools are used to transpile, right? So that you will be able to use patterns like this, okay? But working with modern Node.js, right? Or even on your browser, you can simply set your scripts. You can simply set scripts to type of module that would work. But what you simply need to do in this case is just go ahead and set up that particular package to use a type of module, right? And I'm going to show you how to do that. So within this particular repository right now, or within this directory, I'm going to just say npm init-y. Now we have not started covering npm or node, but I'm just trying to show you how this works. We're going to dive into the details of npm and node when we start discussing backend programming, right? We're going to dive into the details and explain what npm is, okay? But for now, all you need to know is that npm is just a package manager, right? So we'll call it node package manager. That is npm. We'll dive into the detail and show you how to actually use npm to install packages in the future. I mean, we're getting there, very soon. So for now, I just did the npm init, so it gave me this file called package.json. The reason why I want this file is because I just want to set a type of module, right? You see, I also have common JS, but I'm using module now because I mean this would allow me work with the ES6 module type when I'm actually importing and exporting, right? So at this point, I can simply go ahead and call that particular method and then pass in the values that I need to pass in, right? Let's log that. Okay, so I'm going to take off that module as well to show you what the outcome would look like. Oh, let's see. I think we have okay, so it says cannot find the module, blah blah blah. Oh yeah, that's because we are using a different name. Okay, so let's correct that name, employee checks. Okay, so if I run that again, let's see what we have. Run that again. So now it says okay, does not provide an export named add. Oh, I think maybe I might have made a mistake somewhere. Oh, I'm using auth helper. Apologies. We're using auth helper, not employee checks. So at least you see we were able to get that error that says, oh, this particular function is not in that file, right? So at least we know where that is coming from. So now you see we have 10. I added 5 and 5. Given the function I have here, it can only add 2 params, right? So it returns the sum of those 2 params. Okay, I hope that's clear. Someone said Zoom, please. Okay, I don't know why. I think you should be able to. When you're joining these classes, I would always recommend that you also join with your laptop, okay? But I hope this is better now. All right, so what I just did here, and now this is a problem. So when you have to zoom, then you begin to close a couple of things, and it's probably better that you see everything. Okay. Okay, what do I okay. All right, so I hope this makes sense, right? So you import this way. So you see the difference. The previous one we used like require, but now you can just go ahead and say, okay, I want to import this function and this function from this file, right? So this is the modern and the most recent way to work with modules, right? To export the functions and imports. Okay, and of course, if you're exporting a class, this is what it looks like when you're working with ES6, right? You export the class this way. Export default class user, right? You put in your constructor and all the methods. So when you export it this way, you can as well go ahead and import, you can import this way, all right? So you can basically import in a different file this way. Import user from, the name of the file. In our own case, is auth helper. So we can just say auth helper, right? So that's how you import a class, okay? But if you're working with CommonJS, you would basically do your export this way. So you have the class. Let's take this off, and you would also say module.export. Okay, so module.export. So you can go ahead and actually export. That should be equals, right? Okay, so you can export your class this way in CommonJS. Okay, and then import. Of course, you know what this would look like. So now you're not using require, but you're not using the from, but you use require, right? If you are basic, oh yeah, you have to take this off as well. It can be let, it can be const, whatever it is. So const user equals require auth helper. Now you are basically importing, that user. So you see we have import user. This is basically what is going to happen here. You're importing this user. Of course, because you are exporting an object, you can pass it in this way. So it gives you the specific, item. If you don't pass it in that way, then you probably want to do user.user in order to get the class, right? I hope that makes sense. Okay. So remember, CommonJS uses require, right? And then module, ES6 module, when it comes to importing and exporting, you just do import from. Okay, that's what you do. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. And yeah, so that's basically how you perform imports and exports. So I've given us a couple of examples. Yeah, if you also want to import like every single thing you have in that file when you're working with module, the ES6 module, you can simply say import asterisk. Now this is basically we often call it a wildcard, right? A wildcard. So it's saying, okay, get us everything, right? So get us everything as So the point of using as is you're basically calling everything that is going to be gotten from this particular file. We are giving it an alias, right? And the alias we're giving it here, we'll call it a math. We call it math function. Okay, so we'll call it math functions so that we would be able to use, because of course you can't, this is not an identifier, right? So now this is our identifier for saying that when we brought out every single thing, so from that file, just like this, we'll bring out every single thing from, I think I'm doing this in the wrong place. Let's come back here. Okay, so just like what we have here right now, okay, we can come back to say, okay, get us everything as math functions, right, from auth helper. Now, auth helper should then have the math functions, which is this, add and subtract. Okay, so now this should be able to give us add or subtract. Can you see that? Okay, because we've added this as the alias, as the identifier to all the items that were exported out. It's nice to use this, especially when you have like a lot of functions. Imagine having 20 of this. You don't want to come in here to say, okay, import 1, 2, 3, 4, down to 20. Okay, but you really want everything. So just say, okay, give us everything, but then identify as this name, right? Okay, so that makes sense. So when you use the math function dot, you are able to pick the specific function that you want to call. All right. So I think there's a comment there. The function code to add and subtract is not in the auth helper, but they are still imported. Or did you take them off? Okay. The function code to add and subtract. Oh yes, I think I took them off, if that was what you were asking, because I was showing an example for the class. But now I brought them back in, and we're importing it right now with this, we're importing everything within that file as math functions. I hope that makes sense. I don't know, maybe there's something you're trying to clarify. You can probably ask the question again, okay, if you're trying to clarify something. Okay, so yeah, and that is it on, working with imports and exports, either using ES6 modules or CommonJS, right? So if you have any questions, probably for the next 2-3 minutes, let's take those questions because we have reached the end of this session. And if you have questions from the other sessions that we've also covered, you can ask those questions and we can probably take 1 or 2 before we end this session. All right, so it's just 40 minutes and we've been able to cover everything we need to cover in this class. I hope this makes sense. Probably I will try maybe like let's try our hands on something like an example. So remember we created this. Let's bring the items we have. I was thinking we created some. Oh, okay. I think it was auth helper. Yeah, I think that is it. Okay, so we created these functions. We created these functions. So let's assume that, yeah, by the way, even when working with CommonJS, you should understand, and I've mentioned this before, there are different ways to actually, put these functions together. You can choose to wrap them, as an object if you want to, right? You can wrap them together as an object where you have something that looks like this. So we can have maybe const math. Okay, let's call this auth functions. I'll prefer to start with this. Okay, equals, right? So I can basically, grab these guys. Yeah, these two. I can drop it in here, but this time around, I don't need to, put the function that way. Take this one off. I can put a comma here, right? So you see, I am able to do this, okay? And yeah, so you can also, there's a different pattern that I'm also going to show you here. So, or I think, let me just show you out. So let's see, how do we do that? Const, I think it's exports. Is it exports? I'm not very sure if that is correct, but I'm going to try that. I'm going to try that, just to see if it's valid, right? So the first pattern I was showing you, you can basically wrap everything into that, into that object, and then you export, the base object itself. So when you say object dots, right, you get the specific function you're looking for. Now, if you want to export this without having to do module.exports, in CommonJS, there's also a way to say export dots. I don't think this is valid. I'm trying to be very sure. So I'm going to say equals function. Maybe I don't need this. Yeah, export dots. Files a CommonJS module will be converted, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I'm trying to remember these things, but I think this is how it works. So we're going to experiment with this, just to make sure that we are we're getting it. So yeah, let's go ahead and try this. Okay, so I'm going to try to import this now within the main .js file. So let's say we have const, and then I'm going to bring in those items, which is like hash user password. Okay, let's bring in hash user password. I would say equals require. All right, auth helper. Okay, so let's go ahead and see if I can simply say console.log hash user password, and let's just pass in a password, hello world. All right, so if I should run this, what do we get? Okay, so we have an error. It says require is not oh, beautiful. Yeah, so we have that error because in our package.json we already added a module. We can just change it to CommonJS, or we can take it off completely. Right, let's save this. Okay, and let's run that again. Right, so that works. Okay, so that's a different way to actually export, the items individually without having to, use the module.exports, right? So you can export each function individually like this, and then you have the function name before passing in the function with this pattern. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Let me look at the charts. We don't have any questions, so I believe that you guys are clear on this, right? Yeah. Okay, so the attendance form has been shared. Please, if someone can do us a favor, just pick that attendance from YouTube or Twitch and drop it on LinkedIn, because I realize that most of the guys watching from LinkedIn don't get these attendance links, right? So yeah, do well to share on LinkedIn. Thank you, and yeah, have a wonderful evening. Have a wonderful night. You can basically grab this from the repo. So let's do git add. By the way, I think we can come back one step. Yeah. Okay. All right. I'll just say commit added notes 5 code files. Okay. So you can grab that from GitHub, and by tomorrow there will be a general refactor on the structuring of this repository, right? So by the time you download it, it will be easier for you to follow through. Okay. So do have a wonderful evening, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks, and goodbye.